Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh. Cassette 5.
Mrs. Frisby first pushed the packet up through the hole, then as quietly as she could, grasping both sides, she pulled herself up and into the kitchen. It was light there, but Mr. Ages had not been joking when he had said the ceiling was low. There was less than an inch between the floor and the bottom of the cabinet, so that she could not walk properly but had to flatten herself out and crawl. She did, a few steps, and discovered that she was trembling. "Stay calm," she told herself. "Don't get panicky, or you'll do something foolish and spoil everything." Thus admonished, she crept forward again until she was near the edge of the cabinet. She stopped. From there she could see out into the kitchen fairly well. Straight across from her stood a big white gas stove, and in front of it, putting the lid on a pot, was Mrs. Fitzgibbon. Because the edge of the cabinet was so low, Mrs. Frisby could not see her head, but only up to her shoulders. "There," Mrs. Fitzgibbon said, as if to herself. "The stew is done. The bread's in the oven. The table is set." Where was the cat's bowl? Mrs. Frisby looked to her right as Mr. Ages had said. There it was, blue, with words inscribed around the side. Yet something was wrong. It was not 2 feet from the cabinet, but more like 4 or 5. In the corner, where it should have been, rose 4 round wooden legs. She realized that she was looking at the bottom of a kitchen stool. "No matter," she thought. "The extra distance is just a couple of feet." Mr. Ages had not mentioned a stool, but perhaps they moved it around. She crawled to her right, as close to the bowl as she could get without showing herself, and tore open the package. Just as she did this, Mrs. Fitzgibbon walked over from the stove. Her hand appeared, picked up the bowl, and Mrs. Frisby heard it thump on the counter over her head. A cutting sound, a can opener, the scrape of a spoon, and the bowl was back on the floor. The strong, fishy smell of cat food. Mrs. Fitzgibbon walked away. "Now!" Mrs. Frisby moved swiftly out into the room, across the open floor, holding the powder, her eyes intent only on the bowl. She was no longer trembling. She poured in the powder, which instantly dissolved in the moist cat food. Still clutching the paper, she turned and sped toward the cabinet. With a bang, the lights went dim. The ceiling, which had somehow become curved, was filled with little round moons. Mrs. Frisby kept running, and her face struck a cold, hard wall of metal. A voice shouted, "Mother, don't let Dragon in yet. I've caught a mouse." Billy, the younger Fitzgibbon son, had been sitting on the kitchen stool, his feet up on the rung, eating berries from a colander. The colander, upside down, was now over Mrs. Frisby. "7 dead rats." From a birdcage, Mrs. Frisby watched the Fitzgibbons eat dinner. There was dinner for her, too. Breadcrumbs, cheese, and bits of carrot, on the floor of the cage, along with a small bowl of water. The cage had been occupied until a few months before by a yellow canary named Porgy, who had lived in it for 5 years, and then died of old age. To get her out from under the colander, Billy had slid a piece of cardboard beneath it, pinching her foot sharply in the process, so that it hurt when she walked. She had been transferred first to a shoebox. "Can I keep it?" Billy had asked his mother. "What for? It's just a field mouse." "For a pet. I like it." Billy had tried to look at Mrs. Frisby through some holes he had punched in the top of the box, but it was dark inside. "I suppose so. For a few days. You'll have to feed it." "I think I'll put it in Porgy's cage. I can't see it in this box. It must be hungry. It was trying to eat Dragon's food. Dumb mouse. It might have been killed." No one had noticed the small torn piece of paper at first. Then Mrs. Fitzgibbon had absently picked it up and tossed it into the wastebasket. A few days. Mrs. Frisby felt sick. And after a few days, then what? Would they let her go? Or would Billy plead for a few more? But even if they did set her free, her children were alone. The rats were coming tonight to move her house. Why had Billy picked today of all days to sit on the stool? She had not the heart to eat the food that lay on the cage floor. She felt like weeping. Paul came in for dinner, followed by his father. He looked at her in the cage. "Why don't you let it go?" he said to Billy. "Poor little thing, it's scared to death." "No, it's not. It's just not used to the cage." "I bet it will die. I bet it won't." "You can't just put wild animals in cages. You have to catch them when they're babies." "They do it in zoos." "Yes, but they know more about it. Anyway, a lot of those die, too." "It's strange that it was in here at all," said Mrs. Fitzgibbon. "I haven't seen any signs of mice. I didn't think we had any." They sat at the table and Mrs. Fitzgibbon served the stew. It was a long, square-cut farm table, big enough to feed, besides the family, the 4 hired hands who would be working with Mr. Fitzgibbon during the planting and harvesting. The Fitzgibbons sat together around one end of it. Mrs. Frisby's cage hung from a metal stand in the corner on the opposite side of the room, quite high up, so that the floor where she crouched was above their heads. She could watch them, looking down. But if she retreated to the far side of the cage, they could not see her, nor she them. She kept hoping that Paul would resume the argument with Billy and win it, or at least convince Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgibbon that they should let her go. But Paul was now busy eating. So, moving quietly, she crept to the back of the cage. There was a sliding door halfway up the side, which Billy had lifted to put her in. Remembering Nicodemus's story, she looked at it, wondering if she could climb to it, if she could get it open if she did. Not now, but later, when they had left the kitchen. Maybe. But it looked quite big and heavy. She thought about her children again. Surely when Justin had waited a little longer, he would realize that something had gone wrong. He would go and talk to them. But what could he tell them? "Children, your mother went into the kitchen with Dragon and she hasn't come out?" No. But whatever he said, they would be dreadfully frightened and worried. Poor Cynthia. Poor Timothy. Poor all of them. She had one small satisfaction. Dragon, who had been admitted after she was safely caged, had eaten his bowl of cat food greedily, sleeping powder and all, purring as he licked the last scraps from the bottom. Billy was looking at the cage. "There!" he cried. "It walked! I saw it! I told you it was all right!" He started up from his chair. "Billy, stay in your place and eat your stew," said Mrs. Fitzgibbon. "The mouse can wait." "Speaking of mice," said Mr. Fitzgibbon, who had driven to town that afternoon, "there was quite a stir today at Henderson's hardware store." "About mice?" "No, but nearly. About rats. I went in to order the new linchpin, and there was quite a group there, talking about an odd thing that had happened. It seems that 6 or 7 rats got themselves electrocuted there a few days ago. Very strange. Henderson sells motors. He has a whole shelf of them. The rats, for some reason, had got on the shelf. He says it looks as if they were fooling with one of the motors, trying to move it." "That's a new one," said Paul. "Rats stealing motors." They weren't really, of course. Anyway, it happened during the night. When Henderson, came into the shop in the morning, he tried to turn on the lights, and the fuse was blown. He found the rats all grouped around the motor. It had been left plugged in, though it was turned off. They must have been gnawing at the insulation for some reason. At least that's what he thinks. They caused a short circuit, and all bunched together like that, the current went through them and killed the lot. "Pretty good kind of a rat trap, I'd say," Mrs. Fitzgibbon remarked. Mrs. Frisby was now listening to the conversation very closely. Dragon had stretched out on the floor, looking drowsy. "Wait," said Mr. Fitzgibbon. "That's only the beginning. It seems that the local weekly was hard up for news. They heard about it and they sent their reporter over." "Fred Smith?" said Mrs. Fitzgibbon. "Yes, Fred wrote a little article about it with a headline, 'Mechanized Rats Invade Hardware Store.' Something like that. Well, it attracted more attention than he expected. The next thing they knew, believe it or not, the federal government got into it. They sent a squad over there from the Public Health Service with a truckload of equipment." "Just on account of 7 rats?" said Billy. "They should send the truck over here. We've got more than that." "That's just what I said," Mr. Fitzgibbon went on. "And do you know, they're going to? I was joking, of course, but the man in charge of the group didn't take it as a joke at all. He wanted to know where the farm was, how far away, how many acres, what I raised, how many rats I thought there were. He acted really interested. It seems they wanted to examine the dead rats at Henderson's, but they couldn't. He'd already sent them to the town dump, and they were incinerated." "I never heard of such a thing," said Mrs. Fitzgibbon. "All that fuss over a few dead rats?" "I have," said Paul, "and I bet I know what they're after." "What?" "They think the rats have rabies. They don't like to say so because it makes people panicky." "What's rabies?" asked Billy. "A disease," said Mr. Fitzgibbon, "a very bad one, spread by animals. You know, Paul, I think you're probably right. That would explain why the Public Health Service is in it. Epidemic control. Anyway, they're planning to check on the rats all over this area." "Don't you remember," Paul said, "a few years ago when everybody had to lock up their dogs? And some people were shooting every dog they saw? That's why they keep it quiet until they're sure. And another thing, they taught us in the vet course in school that when an animal starts acting strange, it may be a sign of rabies. Well, chewing electric wires, that's strange enough." "And they think some rats here might be infected?" Mrs. Fitzgibbon sounded worried. "I suppose they must," said Mr. Fitzgibbon, "though they never mention rabies at all." "When are they coming?" "Day after tomorrow, Saturday morning. The man in charge, a doctor somebody, said they had some more checking to do in town tomorrow. They're coming with an extermination truck. Cyanide gas, I think." "I can tell them where to look," Paul said. "Me too," said Billy, "under the rose bush." "That's right," said Mr. Fitzgibbon. "In fact, they'll probably want to bulldoze that bush out of there. I can do that with the big tractor." "Bulldoze my rose bush?" said Mrs. Fitzgibbon indignantly. "They will not." "Look at it this way," her husband said. "I've got to get rid of those rats anyway. I'd already decided to. They're stealing too much feed. Seeds, too. More all the time. If I paid an exterminator to do it, he'd charge a couple of $100. If the government will do it free, why shouldn't we let them?" "Well," said Mrs. Fitzgibbon, still not soothed, "then you can spend the money to buy me some new rose bushes." "That's just what I had in mind," said Mr. Fitzgibbon with a smile. "And maybe some lilacs, too." Mrs. Fitzgibbon had always wanted a lilac bush. They were her favorite shrubs. Mrs. Frisby did not believe at all that it was rabies the men were looking for. She wished Mr. Fitzgibbon had been able to remember the name of the doctor somebody. And now she had another urgent reason to get out of the cage. Somehow she had to warn Nicodemus. Dragon slept on the kitchen floor. Escape. At 10 by the kitchen clock, the Fitzgibbons went to bed. Dragon was put out, the doors locked, the lights turned off. The first of these things was done by Billy, on instruction from his mother, not without some difficulty. He opened the door. "Come on, Dragon. Out." "He won't get up." "I never saw such a lazy cat. He gets worse every day." Finally, Dragon, protesting with only the sleepiest of whines, was picked up and deposited on the back porch. He scarcely opened his eyes. By that time it was dark. Mrs. Frisby waited a few minutes until she was sure they were really gone, and until her eyes adjusted so she could see the bars of her cage. They were vertical bars, smooth and no thicker than matchsticks, which made them slippery to climb, but by turning more or less sideways, she was able to grip them fairly well. She inched her way up to the sliding door and tried to lift it. She could tell from the first pull that it was no use. The door was stiff and it was heavy, and she could not get a good enough grip on either it or the cage wall to exert much pressure. Still she kept trying, first lifting on the middle of the door, then on one corner, then another, straining every muscle. In half an hour she admitted defeat, at least for the moment, and climbed back down to the bottom of the cage. She sat there, shaking from the effort, and thought. Somehow she had to get out. Her children, even now, would be alone in the dark house, alone at night for the first time. Martin and Teresa would be trying to reassure the younger ones, yet they themselves would be sadly frightened. What would they think? Since she had not told them about Dragon and the sleeping powder, she hoped that perhaps they would decide she had for some reason stayed with the rats. But at 11, which could not be far off, she could not read the kitchen clock in the dark, the rats would arrive to move the house. Or would they, knowing, since Justin must have told them, that she had not come out of the kitchen? She thought they would, she hoped they would, and that Justin would go with them and talk to the children and try to calm their fear. There was something about Justin, a kind of easy confidence that would help them. She no longer had any doubt, of course, that the rats could move her house. It was a generous thing to do, especially at a time when they were hurrying so in their plan, their own move. And they had no idea yet of how little time they really had, of the new danger that crowded upon them. If she could only get out, she would run and warn them, and it might still not be too late. She thought, it's a good plan and a brave one. It would be the first time in all the world that intelligent beings, besides men, had ever tried to start a real civilization of their own. They ought to have a chance. It was not right that they should be killed at the last minute, or captured. Could it be that they, the men who were coming, were somehow connected with Nimh? Or was it more likely, as Paul had guessed, that they were only worried about rabies? She decided it didn't really matter. The result would be the same. The day after next, the truck would come with its poison gas, and that would be the end of all their plans. Unless they could be warned. Wearily, she got up to climb the wall and tried the door again. She heard a noise. It was in the kitchen near her cage, a small scuffling on the hard linoleum floor. Now what kind of a bird can that be, with no wings? It was Justin's voice, very soft, and he was laughing. Justin! I thought you might like to come home. Your children are asking after you. Are they all right? They're fine. They were worried, but I told them I'd bring you back. They seemed to believe me. But how did you know that you were here? You forget. I was waiting just under the cabinet. I heard what happened. I felt like biting Billy full of holes. But as soon as I heard that you were safely in the cage, I went and told the children you were all right, but that you'd be a little late. I didn't tell them exactly why. Now, let's get you out. I tried. I couldn't open the door. I'll get it open. I brought along a few tools. Burglar's tools, you might say, in my backpack. Should I climb up the stand? No, it looks slippery. I think I'll try the curtain. And in a matter of seconds, Justin had swarmed up a window curtain a foot away, and she heard a thump as he leaped and landed on top of the cage, which swayed from the impact. The noise was slight, but they both listened intently for a moment to see if it produced another from upstairs. All quiet. Now let me look at that door. Justin climbed easily down the side of the cage. Oh, I hope you can get it open. I can, Justin said, examining it. Easily enough. But I don't think I will. Why not? Because you couldn't, Justin said, and they'll know that. So they won't be curious. Let's make it open itself. As I expected, it doesn't have real hinges. He had pulled a small metal bar out of his backpack and was working as he talked. Just little wire rings, dime store quality. Cheap, flimsy things. They're always coming apart. As he said that, one of them came apart. The door sagged and hung crazily by one corner. There, you see? You couldn't help it if they put you in a defective cage. Come on out. Mrs. Frisby climbed through and stood with Justin on the top of the cage. Now, he said, we shinny down the stand like a fireman's pole. You go out the way you came in, under the cabinet and through the hole. I'll go out the way I came in, through the attic. I'll meet you outside. Justin, Mrs. Frisby said, there's something I've got to tell you. Something I learned. Wait till we're out, said Justin. We've got to hurry. You see, we're having a little trouble moving your cinder block. He was off, running silently into the front of the house, from which the stairway led up 2 flights to the attic. Mrs. Frisby crawled under the cabinet, searched in total darkness for the small hole, and finally felt one foot slip down. She dropped through. The square opening in the foundation was easier to find. It glowed palely ahead of her, lit with moonlight. Justin was waiting for her as she came out of the corner of the screen. The night was warm, and a half-moon shone on the farmyard. Now, he said, what was it you wanted to tell me? He spoke seriously. He had heard the urgency in her voice. They hurried toward the garden, rounding the back porch. There, a dark heap in the moonlight, lay Dragon, no threat to anyone tonight. Some exterminators are coming to poison all of you, Mrs. Frisby told him, as briefly as she could, of the conversation she had heard at the Fitzgibbons' dinner table. 7 rats, Justin said. Rabies? It might be, but I'll bet it was Jenner. When are the men supposed to come? The day after tomorrow. To her surprise, Justin stopped. He looked at her in admiration. You know, he said, I had a feeling the first time I clapped eyes on you that you'd bring us good luck. Good luck? She was amazed. Oh, it's bad news. It's serious. We'll have to change our plans, and quickly. But think how much worse it would be if you hadn't overheard it. We wouldn't have had a chance. They came into the garden. Is Nicodemus here? Mrs. Frisby asked. No. In a few minutes I'll go and tell him. But first we need your help to get started moving your house. My help? What can I do? You can talk to your neighbor. She seems to think we're stealing your cinder block. She bit Arthur in the leg. At one end of the big stone, in the middle of the garden, 10 rats were digging briskly, using scoops that looked more like teaspoons than shovels, piling the earth neatly beside a hole already almost big enough to hold Mrs. Frisby's house. But on the other side of the stone, there was an impasse. Here another 10 rats stood, baffled, in a semicircle. Behind them they had deposited a jumble of equipment. Odd-shaped metal bars, pulleys, wooden structures that looked like ladders, other pieces of wood that resembled small logs. But between the rats and Mrs. Frisby's front door stood a small, defiant figure. The rats, looking enormous by comparison, remained a respectful distance away from her. "Why," said Mrs. Frisby to Justin, "it's the shrew." "Yes," said Justin, "and acting shrewish." One of the rats was speaking. Mrs. Frisby recognized Arthur. "But I told you, ma'am, we do have Mrs. Frisby's permission. She wants us to move her house. Ask the children. Call them out." "Don't tell me that. What have you done with Mrs. Frisby?" "It's a good thing the children haven't heard you. They'd be frightened half to death. If Mrs. Frisby wanted you to move her house, she'd be here." "It's all right," called Mrs. Frisby, running forward. "I'm here." "Mrs. Frisby," said the shrew, "you're just in time. I heard a noise and came out and found these creatures trying to dig up your house." "I tried to explain to her," said Arthur, "but she won't believe me." "I certainly won't," said the shrew. "He said you asked him to dig up your house. Thieving rats." "It's true," Mrs. Frisby said. "I did ask them, and they said they would. It's very kind of them." "Kind?" said the shrew. "Great hulking beasts! What do you mean?" It took several more minutes of reassurance by Mrs. Frisby before the shrew grudgingly moved aside, still muttering warnings. "I wouldn't trust them. How do you know they'll do what they say?" That, of course, Mrs. Frisby could not explain to her. The rats now commenced to dig busily at the dirt on top of and around Mrs. Frisby's cinder block. Justin said, "I've got to go and talk to Nicodemus. You'd better get the children out." Mrs. Frisby hurried into her house. She found them waiting in the living room, unaware of the small crisis that had been taking place outside. As Justin had said, they did not seem worried. "We were scared at first," Teresa said, "but then one of the rats came to see us. He couldn't come in, but he called to us, and we came out, Martin and I. He said his name was Justin. Have you met him? He's very nice." "I've met him," said Mrs. Frisby. "Now we'd better go outside. They're getting ready to move the house." "I'm ready," said Timothy. "I'm all wrapped up like a scarecrow." Martin and Teresa had taken pieces of warm cloth from the bed and tied them around him. Mrs. Frisby could not see him in the dark, but when she touched him she found they had even tied a piece like a bonnet around his head and ears. "Good," she said, "and we're lucky. It's a warm night and dry." They went up the small tunnel to the garden and watched in the moonlight from a hillock a few feet away. The rats had finished digging the new hole, and all 20 of them were working near the house. It was a sight to see. As soon as the earth had been cleared from the top and sides of the cinder block, so that it lay fully exposed in its hole, all of the rats turned to the pile of equipment. Under Arthur's direction, the ladder-like structures became a scaffolding, 4 small towers standing one near each corner of the block. Across the tops of these, the rats fastened strong, light bars of metal, probably, Mrs. Frisby thought, from the toy tinker's truck. From these bars they now hung pulleys, wound with strong, thin cord, and at the ends of the cords they fastened hooks, which they slipped into the oval-shaped holes in the block and pulled taut. 5 strong rats stood by each cord. One of them, Mrs. Frisby noticed, was bigger than the rest, her friend Brutus. "Heave!" called Arthur. The 20 rats strained on the cords, and the block rose an inch. Each rat stepped back a pace. "Heave!" Another inch. Slowly, the heavy block rose from the hole until it hung 2 inches above level ground. "Steady," said Arthur. "Get the rollers." 8 rats, 2 from each group, ran to the round pieces of wood Mrs. Frisby had noticed earlier. These resembled sawed-up pieces of broom handle, each about a foot long. 2 rats to a roller, they slipped 4 of these under the cinder block so that they lay athwart the hole, like bars across a window. "Lower away," said Arthur, and the cinder block came to rest gently on the rollers. "Let's see how it rolls." They slipped the ropes free of the pulleys and rehooked 2 of them to the front of the block. 9 rats now manned each rope. 2 stayed behind, watching the rollers. "Heave!" The rollers turned, and the heavy block slid forward easily, like a truck on wheels, in the direction of the new hole. When it moved off the hindmost of the rollers, as it did every few inches, the two rats in the rear would quickly pick that one up and replace it under the front of the block. Almost like a game of leapfrog, Mrs. Frisby thought, but a well-rehearsed game. The rats had planned carefully. They knew exactly what they were doing. They moved with precision and never wasted a motion. Within a very few minutes, the first of the rollers lay across the new hole, then the second, and finally all four. The block was poised and in position. The hole was exactly the right size and shape. The rats had even dug out a new pantry hole in one corner and carved out the small tunnel that would connect the two rooms of the house. The towers and the pulleys were put up again, and the whole process of lifting and lowering was done in reverse. The rollers were pulled away, and the block was eased slowly into its new home. "It's done!" cried Mrs. Frisby. She felt like applauding. "Not quite yet," said Arthur over his shoulder. To the other rats he said, "Get the shovels and the backpacks." Pausing a moment to rest, he explained to Mrs. Frisby, "We're going to cover it with turf, and then we've got to fill up the old hole with the dirt from the new one, or Mr. Fitzgibbon will wonder who's been digging up his garden. Also, we've still to dig you an entrance hole." In her excitement, Mrs. Frisby had forgotten this small detail. She could not get into her house. Now she watched in awe as Arthur and Brutus, using two small, sharp, long-handled shovels, dug the narrow tunnel down to her living room. It took them somewhat less than 5 minutes. It had taken her all day to dig the other one. "Now," said Arthur, "you can put your children to bed. We'll take care of the rest." At the meeting, Mrs. Frisby slept well and soundly, the day just finished having been the longest and hardest she had ever known. She awoke in the morning with a smile. Her house was warm, and it was safe at last. Her children slept peacefully beside her. Timothy's breathing was quiet and easy. They could stay in the house now as long as they needed to. On some warm day later in the spring, when Timothy was strong again, they would move to the summer house down by the brook. Another nice thing, she thought. When they left the house, she would close up the entrance tunnel so that no one could find it. Undisturbed by the plow, it would be ready and waiting for them in the fall. It could be theirs forever, thanks to the rats. The rats. In her half-dreaming state, she had forgotten. They were in terrible danger. What would they do? She felt as if she ought to go and offer to help them. But help how? She could think of nothing she could do. At that moment, she heard a voice calling her name from above. "Mrs. Frisby?" She left the bed and went to the bottom of the entrance hole. "Yes? Who's calling?" "It's me, Brutus. Can you come up?" Mrs. Frisby climbed up and out her front door, blinking in the early morning sunlight. "Nicodemus wants to know if you can come with me. He's having a meeting." "Just let me wake the children and tell them." 2 minutes later, she was walking with Brutus toward the rose bush. "What does Nicodemus want?" "It's about the men. Justin told us last night. Nicodemus thinks they may be from Nimh. He wants to ask you more about what Mr. Fitzgibbon said." That morning there were 2 rats on sentry duty. One just inside the entrance to the rose bush, watching Mr. Fitzgibbon's house, another at the arch where Brutus had stood. All of the rest were gathered in the large assembly room Mrs. Frisby had seen when she got off the elevator. Nicodemus, Justin, Arthur, and 2 other rats sat on the raised platform at the end. The rest sat facing them, filling every square inch of floor space except for an aisle up the center. Mrs. Frisby had never seen so many rats. Even the young ones were present. She spotted Isabella, staring up at the platform with wide, round eyes. Some of the mothers held small babies at their sides. Most of them looked anxious. There was an air of tension, but none of panic. Brutus led her up the center aisle to the raised platform. There was a table on it, covered with papers, and one vacant space where a chair had been placed for Mrs. Frisby. The rats waited in complete silence while she sat down. Then Nicodemus said, quite formally, "Justin has told us all that happened. Mrs. Frisby, it seems you have more than repaid us for the help we gave you in moving your house. Just as your husband did once, you have saved us from a disaster. Death or capture, we do not yet know which." Justin gave her a wink. "Mrs. Frisby had a taste of capture herself last night. Would you tell us, as well as you can remember it, word for word, what Mr. Fitzgibbon said? About the rats, about the men who were at the store?" "As well as I can remember it." Mrs. Frisby's voice sounded small in the big room. "Mr. Fitzgibbon said a strange thing had happened in the hardware store. Henderson's, he called it." Her memory was good. She had listened with great care to what Mr. Fitzgibbon had said, and she was able to recall the whole conversation word for word. The rats sat quietly while she told it. Then Nicodemus went back over it, asking questions. "You say that Mr. Fitzgibbon said 6 or 7 rats. Did he ever say which number it really was?" "No, I don't think he paid much attention to the number." "Jenner's group was 7, said Justin, "but it could be a coincidence." "Did he say how far away the town was where this happened, or did he name it?" "No, but it must not be very far. He'd been there and back that day." "Did anyone see his car go out?" Nicodemus asked the others. "I heard it," Brutus said. "I was on duty. It went after lunch. And he was back by dinner. But which direction? If we knew, we might send someone. You see," Nicodemus explained to Mrs. Frisby, "we need to know who those men are. If they're from Nimh, things are much worse for us." "We'd never make it," said Arthur. "Driving at, say, 40 or 50 miles an hour, Mr. Fitzgibbon might have gone 15 or 20 miles in any direction, and returned easily the same afternoon. On the map, there was a road map on the table. You can see it could have been any one of half a dozen small towns, and each of them might have a hardware store." "You're right, of course," said Nicodemus. "Without the name, that idea is hopeless."
This ends side 1 of cassette 5. Please turn the cassette over and start side 2 at the same point.
He turned back to Mrs. Frisby. "Mr. Fitzgibbon said the rats were grouped around the motor as if they were trying to move it." "That's what he said the store owner told him. He didn't see it himself." "And that the motor was plugged in." "Had been left plugged in," Mrs. Frisby quoted. "But we don't know who plugged it in." "I got the impression," Mrs. Frisby said, "from the way he said it, that the store owner had left it plugged in, but I'm not sure." "That would make sense," Arthur said. "If it was Jenner, and if they had plugged it in themselves, they'd have known better than to try to move it. So they might not have realized. It was probably pretty dark in the store." "Poor Jenner," said Nicodemus. "I wish he had stayed with us." "It would be poor us," said one of the rats at the table. Mrs. Frisby did not know his name. "If we don't get on with this." "He did not mention the doctor's name," Nicodemus said. "Did he say even a word about what he looked like?" "No." "Did he describe the truck at all?" "No, only that it was full of equipment." "Are you sure about the headline in the local paper, 'Mechanized Rats Invade Hardware Store'?" "I'm sure that's what Mr. Fitzgibbon said it was. But I don't think he saw it. He didn't say so." "In a way, that's the most puzzling thing about the whole story," Nicodemus said. "Why is that?" asked Justin. Because the headline doesn't really fit the facts. You don't call a bunch of dead rats mechanized just because you find them on a shelf near a motor. Maybe not, said the nameless rat, but then why did the newspaper say that? I'm wondering, Nicodemus said, if perhaps there wasn't more to the story. Some stronger reason to think they were really taking the motor away, or that they knew how to use it. Maybe some other motors had been stolen, Justin said, or some tools. That would make them seem mechanized. It would, said Nicodemus, and it would explain what the doctor meant when he said they had more checking to do in town. They're looking for the things that were missing, Arthur said, sounding suddenly worried. They're looking for Jenner's headquarters. And if they find it... We're just guessing, of course, Nicodemus said. But it's a possibility. And a bad one. It means, Nicodemus continued, that we have no choice. We've got to assume they're from Nimh. We've also got to assume that by now they may have found Jenner's headquarters, whatever cave or cavern they were using. And, said Justin, that now they're looking for us. Why for us? Asked one of the rats. Why wouldn't they think Jenner's group are the only ones? They might, Nicodemus admitted, but I don't think so. After all, they know that there were 20 of us originally. Why should there be only 7 now? And we already know that they're coming out here, in quite a hurry at that. So if they're from Nimh, obviously they are looking for us. I think, said Arthur, that we've got to make some plans, and quickly. I agree, said Nicodemus. It's a new situation, and a tricky one. We won't be able to do everything we hope to. There isn't time. And somehow we have to convince the exterminators, when they come, that we aren't more of the mechanized rats they're looking for. We won't be able to move any more food to Thorn Valley, Nicodemus continued. We'll have to get along on what we've already got stored there. About an 18-month supply, if we're careful. The seeds, I believe, are already moved. Yes, said Arthur. The last load went yesterday. So, with luck, we'll have our own first crops this summer and fall. We won't have time to destroy the motors or the books or the furniture, as we planned. Instead, we'll move everything to the cave, and then we'll seal off all entrances to the cave as if it had never existed. That can be done, Arthur said. But there's more. We've got to pull all the wires and lights from the tunnel. They're likely to dig it up. And the carpet. We've got to tear down the arch. Then, when all that's done, when everything is hidden in the cave, we'll fill in the stairway and the elevator shaft. We'll seal off everything except the upper storage room and the tunnels leading in the front and out the back. When they dig, let them find that room. It's as big as an ordinary rat hole. Justin, tonight take a group of 12 or so. Go to the Fitzgibbons garbage can. Bring back a load of the worst-smelling garbage you can find. The storage room is going to become an ordinary, typical rat hole, not in the least mechanized or civilized. Nicodemus turned to Arthur. What do you think? I think we can do it all. We won't get much sleep, though. Justin said, but there's one more thing. Won't they think it's odd, especially if they're from Nimh, finding just an empty hole? Nicodemus said, I was coming to that. He sounded suddenly very tired. Tomorrow morning, as soon as it's light, the main group leaves for Thorn Valley. But some of us will have to stay behind. As Justin says, if they find just an empty hole, they're sure to be suspicious, and they'll keep on digging. So, when they come with their gas truck, they've got to find some rats here. A rear guard. I'd say at least 10. Mrs. Frisby walked slowly home, keeping to the edge of the woods, keeping out of sight. Justin had instantly volunteered for the rear guard. Brutus was second, and behind him 8 more. There were 50 more waiting behind them. Enough, enough, said Nicodemus. Isabella, in tears, had run forward. "I want to stay, please," she had pleaded, looking despairingly at Justin. "No, children," said Nicodemus, and her mother led her away, still weeping. Those 10, the 10 who would remain, did not face certain death, nor certain capture. The exterminators, they presumed, would make noise, especially if they cleared away the rosebush. The rats would be alerted. When the men pumped gas, as expected, into the hole, the pump would also make a noise. The air below would move as the gas flowed in. When they felt that, the rats would scramble out the back exit, past the sealed-off cave, emerge as noisily as possible in the blackberry bramble, indeed show themselves, and dash off into the woods. But won't they block the rear exit? Or put a net over it? "We'll give them another rear exit to block," Arthur had said cryptically. "One that's easier to find." "Mother, why are you so quiet?" asked Teresa. They were sitting down to dinner for the first time in their newly moved house. "You seem sad." "I suppose I am," Mrs. Frisby said. "Because the rats are all going away. But that's no reason. It's true, they moved our house, and that was nice of them, but we didn't really know them. I was getting to know them pretty well." "Where are they going?" Cynthia asked. "To a new home, a long way away." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "Will you go to see them off?" "I think I will." "But why are they moving away?" asked Timothy. "Because they want to," said Mrs. Frisby. Some day soon she would tell them the whole story, but not that night. The Doctor. The next morning, Mr. Fitzgibbon started the larger of his 2 tractors. The huge one he kept in the barn, the one that pulled the combine in the fall harvest. With help from Paul and Billy, he bolted the big bulldozer blade to the front of it, rumbled it up through the barnyard gate, and stopped it near the rosebush. "We'll wait until they come," he said, turning off the engine. Mrs. Frisby could not bear to watch, and yet even more she could not bear not to watch. She knew there was nothing to be gained by it, nothing she could do. Yet how could she stay at home when the 10 rats, including Justin and Brutus, were waiting bravely underground? She could not. She thought at first of her watch-hole in the corner post. Then she decided against it. Nearer to the rosebush, on the edge of the woods, stood a hickory tree, its scaly bark like a ladder inviting her to climb. 10 feet up on this tree, a large branch jutted straight out. On this branch, up close to the trunk, she had a vantage point from which, herself unseen, she could look down on the rosebush and also see into the woods to a blackberry bramble, where, though she had never been in it, she was sure the rat's rear exit must be hidden. She settled down to wait. It was a chilly morning, with a damp breeze and a grey mist that blew by in patches. Somewhere near the middle of the morning, a square white truck came into the driveway. It went first to the house. A man in a white coverall uniform climbed out and knocked on the Fitzgibbons' door. It was too far away for Mrs. Frisby to hear the knock, or to hear what the man said when Mrs. Fitzgibbon came out on the porch, but 10 seconds later, Billy ran from the house to the barn, where Mr. Fitzgibbon was working. The man returned to the truck and waited, standing outside the open cab door. Through the windshield she could see that 2 more men sat in the front seat, and that one of them wore horn-rimmed glasses. Now Mr. Fitzgibbon approached the truck, Billy dancing beside him, apparently in some excitement. There was a conference, none of which Mrs. Frisby could hear, accompanied by gestures toward the rosebush and the waiting bulldozer. The man in white climbed back into the driver's seat and drove the truck across the grass. He backed it up beside the bulldozer, stopping perhaps 10 feet from the bush. Mrs. Frisby stared at it. If there was anything printed on it, it must be on the other side, away from her. Then 3 men climbed out, and she could hear what they said. "It's a big one, all right," said one of the men. "And look at those thorns. It's hard to see how even a rat could get in there." The man in the horn rims walked around the edge of the bush, examining it closely. He bent over. "Look at this," he said. "There's the entrance hole, very neatly hidden, and look behind it. A path leading in." He turned to Mr. Fitzgibbon, who had walked up with Billy. "You were right, you'll need to bulldoze it. It would take us all day to hack our way in there. But cut it off just at the surface if you can. If you dig too deep and open the hole, they'll get away." He added, "You better tell the boy to keep back. We'll be using cyanide, and it's dangerous." Billy, after some argument, was dispatched to the back porch, where Mrs. Fitzgibbon was also watching. One of the men had walked around to the far side of the bush, the side near Mrs. Frisby's tree. "Doc," he called, "here's another entrance in the bush, and there's a hole just inside it." Doc was the man in horn rims. He was a doctor. Mrs. Frisby thought, "Doctor somebody." He was in charge. "Can you get at it?" he asked. "Not very well. Too many thorns." The man who was a doctor walked around and looked at it. "No," he said. "Anyway, that would be the escape hatch. We'll find the main hole nearer the middle of the bush." He turned to Mr. Fitzgibbon, who had mounted the tractor. "Okay," said the doctor. "Can you push it that way, away from the shed?" Mr. Fitzgibbon nodded, and the motor started with a roar. He pulled a lever and flexed the heavy steel blade up and down, bringing the bottom edge to rest just even with the ground. The blade was fully 8 feet across. He pulled another lever. The wheels, with cleated tires as tall as windows, dug in, and the blade scraped forward. The bush fought back, then yielded angrily, snapping and crackling before the inexorable thrust of steel. A single sweep, and a third of it lay a writhing heap of thorns, in a pile 20 feet away. The ground trembled under the wheels, and Mrs. Frisby thought of the 10 rats huddled below. Supposing the weight collapsed the earth, caved in the storage room, and trapped them? Another sweep, and a third. Only a thorny stubble now stood where the bush had been. On the porch, Mrs. Fitzgibbon covered her eyes with her hands, and Billy cheered in excitement. Plainly exposed were 2 holes, simple round rat holes. There was no trace of the small mound, nor the elegant arched entrance. Arthur had done his work thoroughly. Mrs. Frisby wondered for a moment at the second hole. Then she remembered his saying, "We'll give them another rear exit to block." Of course! They had dug another hole, most likely, she thought. Just a dummy, leading nowhere. The men in the white suits went into action. The back doors of the truck were opened, and a long, flexible pipe unrolled. It looked like a fire hose, except that at the end, instead of a nozzle, there was a round plunger, like a big rubber ball cut in half. One of the men donned a mask with a glass visor and a tube that ran to the pack on his back, a gas mask. The masked man pulled the hose over to the center rat hole and pressed the plunger over it, covering it completely. From the back of the truck, the other 2 took a large box made of wood and wire, almost a yard wide, and placed it over the second hole. It was a cage, but half of its bottom was a trapdoor, neatly mounted on hinges. This they raised, placing the open part directly over the opening in the earth. Then they backed away, one of them holding a tripcord, which would close the trapdoor after the rats were inside. "All set?" the doctor called to the man in the mask. The mask nodded. "Keep back now," said the doctor to Mr. Fitzgibbon, who had left his tractor to watch. He walked to the truck, reached inside, and turned a switch. Mrs. Frisby heard the soft throb of a pump. Now. She turned and watched the blackberry bramble in the woods. Would they hear the pump? Where were they? Oh, let them come out. Almost a minute passed. The men in white watched the trap. Nothing moved. Then she saw it, behind the bramble, half hidden by a swirl of mist, a gray-brown shape, a rat, shaking dirt from his ears. Another, then 3 more. They huddled in silence, waiting. More? How many? 10? 7. Only 7. Where were the other 3? Still, they waited. Then, as if by agreement, they stopped waiting. They ran, all 7 of them, not back into the woods to safety, but out of the woods toward the stubble of the rosebush, toward the men. At the edge of the bush, they stopped as if in confusion, ran to the left, ran to the right, then fled back into the woods again. Now they were out of sight of the men, but not of Mrs. Frisby. Instantly they regrouped behind the blackberry bramble and charged out again, but this time in smaller numbers. First 2, then 3, then 2 again. She saw what they were up to. They were not in the least confused. They were making 7 rats look like 20 rats, or 40, a steady stream of them. In the mist, in the hectic turning, running, turning, hiding, she could not tell whether or not she recognized any of them. The men shouted, "Look at that! A pack of them! How did they get out? Get the nets!" The doctor turned off the pump. The man with the hose pulled off his mask. As a new wave of rats danced along the edge of the clearing, all 3 men ran to the truck, and from it pulled long-handled nets. But Mrs. Frisby, up on her branch, was staring at the blackberry bush again. She saw something that all of the others, including the rats, did not see. An 8th rat had come out. He emerged running, but then he stumbled. He got up and ran again, this time more slowly, circling vaguely to the right. He did not seem to know where he was going. He reached a sparse thicket of saplings, almost out of her sight, and there, abruptly, he fell over on his side and lay still. Meanwhile, all 3 men, holding their nets low, ran across the stubble toward the parade of rats. But as they approached the parade, it vanished. The rats, their purpose accomplished, melted into the misty woods, and this time they did not reappear. Mrs. Frisby watched them as they loped away swiftly in single file and disappeared from her view, back into the deep forest and up the mountainside. The rear guard was gone, bound for Thorn Valley. But the 8th rat still lay unmoving among the saplings, and 2 had never come out at all. "They're gone," said the man who had worn the mask. "They fooled us." "What happened?" asked Mr. Fitzgibbon, standing near the truck. "Simple enough," said the doctor. "They had 2 escape holes, and they used the other one." He walked back to the blackberry bramble and bent down, kicking the branches aside with his foot. "Here it is," he said. "Quite a long tunnel. One of the longest I've seen." To the other 2 men he said, "Get the pick and the shovels." For half an hour they dug, laying open a narrow trench along the tunnel. From her angle of view in the tree, Mrs. Frisby could see only the top of this trench, and not down into the bottom. Still she watched, saying to herself, perhaps after all, there were only 8. Maybe they decided that 8 would be enough. Then one of the shovels broke through into air. They had come to the rats' storage room. "There's 2 of them," said one of the men, and her heart sank. Who were they? She wanted to run and look, but she did not dare. "Careful," said the doctor. "There may still be some gas in there. Let the wind blow it out." "Phew," said one of the men. "That's not gas, that's garbage." "Open it up a little more," said the doctor. One of the men wielded his shovel for another minute, and then the doctor peered in. "Garbage," he said. "Last night's dinner. Garbage and 2 dead rats." Mrs. Frisby thought, "He sounds disappointed." "Only 2?" said Mr. Fitzgibbon. "Yes, it's easy to see what happened. In a hole this size there would have been a couple of dozen at least. But these 2 must have been up at the front, near the tunnel. They got a whiff of the gas, and it killed them. But before they died, they must have warned the others, so the rest ran out." "Warned them?" said Mr. Fitzgibbon. "Could they do that?" "Yes," said the doctor. "They're intelligent animals. Some can do a great deal more than that." But he did not elaborate. Instead, he turned to one of the men. "We might as well take these two back with us." From the truck, the man produced a white paper sack and a pair of plastic gloves. He pulled the gloves on, reached into the hole, and placed the two dead rats into the sack. He did this with his back to Mrs. Frisby, so that she never got even a glimpse of them. "All right," said the doctor. "Let's close it up." They shoveled the dirt back into the trench and returned to the truck. "You'll let me know if they have rabies?" said Mr. Fitzgibbon. "Rabies?" said the doctor. "Yes, of course. But I doubt it. They look perfectly healthy." "Perfectly healthy," thought Mrs. Frisby sadly, "except for being dead." She looked into the woods, over toward the saplings where the other rat lay. Was he, too, now dead? To her surprise, she saw that he was moving. Or was he? In the mist it was hard to tell, but something had moved. After the truck had left, Mr. Fitzgibbon stood looking at the ruin of the rosebush. He seemed vaguely puzzled and disappointed. He must be wondering, she thought, whether it had been worth it, just to exterminate 2 rats. He had no way of knowing, of course, that all the rest were also gone and would not return, that his grain loft was safe. In a moment he turned and walked to the house. As soon as he was safely gone, Mrs. Frisby scurried down from her tree and into the woods. On the ground she could no longer see the rat or the thicket where he lay, but she knew the direction, and she ran. Around a stump over a mound of leaves, past a cedar tree. There were the saplings, and there lay the rat, still on his side. It was Brutus. Beside him, futilely trying to move him, stood Mr. Ages. She reached him, breathless from her run. "Is he dead?" "No. He's unconscious, but he's alive and breathing. I think he'll revive if I can just get him to swallow this." Mr. Ages indicated a small corked bottle, no bigger than a thimble, on the ground beside them. "What is it?" "An antidote for the poison. We thought this might happen, so we got it ready last night. He got just a little of the gas, made it this far, and then collapsed. Help me lift his head." Mr. Ages had been unable to lift Brutus's head and the bottle at the same time. Now, with Mrs. Frisby's help, he forced open Brutus's mouth and poured in just a few drops of the smoky liquid the bottle contained. In a few seconds, Brutus made a gulping noise, swallowed hard, and spoke. "It's dark," he said. "I can't see." "Open your eyes," said Mr. Ages. Brutus opened them and looked around. "I'm out," he said. "How did I get here?" "Don't you remember?" "No, wait, yes. I was in the hole. I smelled gas, an awful, choking, sweet smell. I tried to run, but I stumbled over somebody lying on the floor, and I fell down. I must have breathed some of the gas. I couldn't get up. And then I heard the others running past me. I couldn't see them, it was darker than night. Then one of them ran into me and stopped. He pulled me up, and I tried to run again, but I was too dizzy. I kept falling. The other one helped me up again, and I went a few steps more. He kept pulling me and then pushing, and somehow, finally, I got to the end of the tunnel. I saw daylight, and the air smelled better, but there was nobody else there. I thought the others must have left, so I ran a little farther, and that's all I remember." Mrs. Frisby said, "What about the one who helped you?" "I don't know who it was. I couldn't see, and he didn't speak at all. I suppose he was trying to hold his breath. When we got near the end, and I could see daylight, he gave me one last shove toward it, and then he turned back." "He went back?" "Yes. You see, there was still one rat back in there, the one I stumbled over. I think he went back to help that one." "Whoever he was," said Mrs. Frisby, "he never came out. He died in there." "Whoever he was," said Mr. Ages, "he was brave." Epilogue. A few days later, early in the morning, the plough came through the garden. Mrs. Frisby heard the chug of the tractor and the soft scrape of the steel against the earth. She watched from just inside her front door, fearfully at first, but then with growing confidence. The owl and the rats had calculated wisely, and the nearest furrow was more than 2 feet from her house. Behind the plough, in the moist and shining soil, the rudely upturned, red-brown earthworms writhed in a frenzy to rebury themselves. Hopping along each furrow, a flock of spring robins tried to catch them before they slid from sight. And when the ploughing was done, and the worms had all disappeared, either eaten or safely underground, Mr. Fitzgibbon came back with the harrow, breaking down the furrows and turning them all up again. It was a good day for the robins. After the harrow, for the next 2 days, came the Fitzgibbons themselves, all 4 of them, with hoes and bags of seeds, planting lettuce, beans, spinach, potatoes, corn, and mustard greens. Mrs. Frisby and her family kept out of sight. Thoughtfully, Brutus and Arthur had dug their doorway behind a tuft of grass, so that not even Billy noticed it. Brutus and Arthur. Mrs. Frisby did not suppose she would ever see either of them again, nor Nicodemus, nor any of the others. Brutus, after swallowing Mr. Age's medicine and resting for half an hour, had gone on his way into the forest to join the colony in Thorn Valley. There was no talk of their coming back, unless their attempt to grow their own food should fail, and she did not believe that would happen. They were too smart. And even if they did fail, they would probably not come back to Mr. Fitzgibbon's farm. She thought it would be pleasant to visit them and see their new home, their small lake and their crops growing. But she had no idea where the valley was, and it would be in any case too long a journey for her and the children, so she could only wonder about them. Were they at that moment like the Fitzgibbons, planting seeds behind their own plough? Some, like Isabella's mother, might grumble about the hardness of the new life they'd chosen. Yet the story of what had happened to Jenner and his friends, if it was Jenner and his friends, to say nothing of the destruction of their own home, would surely help to convince them that Nicodemus's ideas were right. The Fitzgibbons finished their planting, and for a week or 2 all was quiet. But it would not stay that way. The crops would appear, the asparagus was ready to sprout, and for the rest of the spring and summer the garden would be too busy a place for mice to live in comfortably. So on a day in May as warm as summer, early in the morning, Mrs. Frisby and her children laid a patchwork of sticks, grass, and leaves over the top of the entrance to their cinder-block house, and then carefully scraped earth over it so that it would not show. With luck, they would not have to dig a new one in the fall. They walked to their summer house, taking half a day to do it, strolling slowly and enjoying the fine weather, stopping on the way to eat some new spring leaves of field cress, some young poke greens, and a crisp, spicy mushroom that had sprouted by the edge of the woods. For their main course, a little farther on, there was a whole field of winter wheat, its kernels newly ripe and soft. As they approached the brook, toward the big tree in the hollow of whose roots they would make their summer home, the children ran ahead, shouting and laughing. Timothy ran with them, and Mrs. Frisby was glad to see that he showed no trace of his sickness. It was an exciting time for them. In the garden they were always alone with themselves, but along the bank of the brook in summer lived 5 other mice families, all with children. Within a few minutes of arrival, her 4 had gone with a group of the others down to the water to see the tadpoles swim. Mrs. Frisby set about the job of tidying up the house. which had acquired a carpet of dead leaves during the winter, and then bringing in a pile of soft green moss to serve as bedding for them all. The house was a roomy chamber with a pleasant earthy smell. Its floor was hard-packed dirt, and its wooden roof was an arched intertwining of roots, above which rose the tree itself, an oak. On her way to get the moss, she saw one of her neighbors, a lady mouse named Janice, who, like herself, had 4 children. Janice ran over to talk to her. "You're so late getting here," she said. "We all thought something must have happened to you." "No," said Mrs. Frisby. "We're all fine." "But don't you live in the garden?" Janice persisted. "I should have thought you'd be afraid of the plowing." "As a matter of fact," Mrs. Frisby explained, "they didn't plow the particular spot in the garden where we live. It's behind a boulder." "You were lucky." "That's true." More than that Mrs. Frisby did not tell. She had agreed to keep a secret, and she would do as she had said. Still, she thought after quite a long deliberation it was probably all right to tell her children, first making them promise to keep it a secret. They were, after all, the children of Jonathan Frisby. For all she knew, and for all Nicodemus knew, they were likely to turn out to be quite different from other mice, and they had a right to know the reason. The following evening, therefore, when they had finished an early supper, she gathered them around her. "Children, I have a story to tell you. A long one." "Oh, good!" cried Cynthia. "What kind of a story?" "A true one. About your father and about the rats." "How can it be about father and the rats?" Teresa asked. "Because he was a friend of theirs." "He was?" said Martin incredulously. "I never knew that." "It was mostly before you were born." To everyone's surprise, Timothy said, "I thought he might be. I think Mr. Aegis was, too." "How did you know that?" "I didn't know it. I just thought it. A couple of times I saw Mr. Aegis leaving their rosebush, and I knew that Father used to visit him a lot. But I never saw him near the rosebush." Probably, Mrs. Frisby thought, because he would have been careful always to leave through the blackberry bramble, just so we would not see him. They sat down outside the entrance to the house, and beginning at the beginning, with her first visit to the rats, she told them all that she had seen and done, and all that Nicodemus had told her. It took a long time to tell, and as she talked, the sun sank low, turning the sky red and lighting the tops of the mountains, beyond which, somewhere, the rats of Nimh were living. The children's eyes grew round when she told them about the escape from Nimh, and even rounder when she described her own capture and escape from the birdcage. But in the end, the eyes of Teresa and Cynthia were filled with tears, and Martin and Timothy looked sad. Teresa said, "But, Mother, that's terrible. It must have been Justin. He saved Brutus and then went back. And he was so nice." Mrs. Frisby said, "It may have been Justin. We can't be sure. It could have been one of the others." Martin said, "I'm going to find out. I'm going to go to the Thorn Valley somehow, someday. But it's too far, and you don't know where it is." "No, but I'll bet Jeremy knows. Remember he told you the rats had a clearing back in the hills? That must be in Thorn Valley." He thought about this for a minute. Then he added, "He might even fly me there on his back, the way he did you." "But we don't know where Jeremy is either. We don't see the crows down here," Mrs. Frisby reminded him. "No, but in the fall, when we go back to the garden, I could find him then. If I got something shiny and put it out in the sun, he'd come to get it." Martin was growing excited at his idea. "Oh, Mother, may I?" "I don't know. I doubt that the rats will want visitors from the outside." "They wouldn't mind. After all, you helped them, and so did Father. And I wouldn't do any harm." "It's not something we have to decide tonight," said Mrs. Frisby. "I'll think about it. And now it's late. It's time for bed. The sun had set. They went into the house and lay down on the soft moss Mrs. Frisby had placed on the floor of their room under the roots. Outside, the brook swam quietly through the woods, and up above them, the warm wind blew through the newly opened leaves of the big oak tree. They went to sleep.
The End. You've been listening to Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh by Robert C. O'Brien, narrated by Barbara Caruso. If you've enjoyed this book and this performance, Recorded Books recommends Anne of Green Gables by L. M. Montgomery, also narrated by Barbara Caruso. Written in 1906, Anne of Green Gables is the classic story of a young orphan girl adopted into a farm family on Prince Edward Island. You'll find a wide selection of titles, including bestsellers, mysteries, classics, histories, and more in the Recorded Books catalog. So to order another recorded book, or for a copy of our latest listing, call us toll-free nationwide at 1-800-638-1304. You can order by phone with Visa or MasterCard, or by writing to us, or faxing us at 410-535-5499. Don't forget to ask about easy 30-day rentals by mail. And thank you for being a Recorded Books reader.